Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give a few minutes for people to join. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome once again to today's EPI-WIN webinar. Today is a very important one. We're talking, the topic is Unite to End Digital Violence, why digital safety is a gender and public health imperative in emergencies. And that's something that affects all of us. So I hope you'll be very interested in it. I'd particularly like to welcome those of you who are joining from far away, where it's late in the evening, at night, or early in the morning. We really appreciate your being here. For those of you who are not familiar with EPI-WIN, our goal is to make health emergency information accessible, understandable, and relevant for evidence-informed actions and policies by everyone, by the public and by decision makers. And today, we have a very great speakers. We have Dr. Stella Chungong, who's director and leads a gender working group in WHE. We have Ms. Reem Al-Salam, who's the special rapporteur for UN Special Rapporteur for of violence against women, and many others. But before I go to that, some housekeeping. This is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with you later. We would like to have all of you introduce yourself in the chat. We love to hear from you and where you come from. But if you have questions, please put it in your Q&A. Then finally, before we start, we'd like to hear from you on what you think of this topic. So quick Slido. If you go to slido.com, hashtag 9743249. 9743249. We'd love to hear from you. We want to know, what do you understand by gender-based violence, digital gender-based violence? If you could write in a few words what you understand by digital, what does it mean to you? Tech-facilitated GBV, exclusion, misconduct, discrimination, no consent, something like cyberbullying. Please don't put the number of the Slido. Please share what you understand by digital gender-based violence. Victimization, disrespect of women, harassment, revenge pornography. We'd like to hear from a few more of you. Psychological, emotional, discrimination, misconduct, harassment, unethical behavior are coming out strong here. Psychological warfare. So thank you very much. I will leave the Slido on. We'd love to hear from more of you over the period of this webinar, but I will now hand over for the main part of the webinar to Dr. Vera, sitting right here next to me. But before I hand over to her, just one last word. This is for all of us to learn from each other and support this area. So please keep it respectful. Put your views in the chat, but keep it respectful, positive, constructive. Anyone who, well, this is on digital gender-based violence, but anyone who is disrespectful will be taken out of the webinar. With that, I hand over to Vera. The floor is yours. The show is yours, actually.
Thank you so much, Supriya. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all so much for this investment of your time. We truly appreciate it. Doxing, trolling, AI-generated deepfakes, TG-DAW, cyberbullying, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing all the words right. What do all these words mean to us? What do they have to do with women, with gender, with health emergencies, with communities? And you see, the crafters of this year, 16 days of activism against gender-based violence and the UNiTE campaign have chosen a very interesting, bold, timely, and profoundly relevant topic. I'm not going to attempt to interpret or introduce the theme. I'm not an expert, and we do have an outstanding panel of experts who are far better placed to do so than I. But before we begin exploring these intersections and themes, it is my honor to turn to someone far more appropriately placed to offer us a formal welcome and to kickstart this webinar. Please join me in welcoming the Director of the Department of Health Emergency Preparedness and the Chair of the WHO Health Emergencies Gender Working Group. Dr. Stella Chungong is a global authority in health emergency preparedness and a driving force behind gender integration in crisis response. And she will begin with preparedness begins with protection, why digital violence must be addressed in humanitarian health work. Welcome, Dr. Stella.
Thank you so much, Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all, and thank you for joining us despite your busy agendas. On behalf of the World Health Emergencies Program and the WHO Working Group on Gender, it is a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar that we are holding as part of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence under this year's theme of UNiTE to End Digital Violence Against All Women and Girls. At first glance, digital violence may seem far removed from the core work of health emergency preparedness and response. But when we look at how closely the evidence shows that digital systems now underpin our work in crisis settings, it becomes clear that digital violence is a frontline public health threat. It affects the safety of responders, the trust of communities, and the effectiveness of every emergency operation. This year's theme is timely. The United Nations Secretary General has warned through his 2024 report on technology-facilitated violence that digital abuse is rising at an alarming speed and with devastating consequences for women's rights, well-being, and participation in public life. We are honored that the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls has chosen to join us here today. We also thank the Executive Director of the UN's Population Fund, UNFPA, who sent senior representation and their strong support for this conversation. So, why does digital violence matter now? Digital violence and technology-facilitated violence is one of the fastest growing forms of abuse. The statistics we have speak for themselves. Between 16 and 58% of women globally have experienced digital violence or technology-facilitated violence. 38% report direct online harassment. Another 73% of women journalists and women communicators face online violence, a risk pattern similar to what we are seeing amongst women health responders. Globally, 90 to 95% of all deepfakes are non-consensual and sexualized, and 95% target women. Nearly 300 million children experienced online sexual exploitation last year. These figures reveal more than a digital problem. They expose a major gender inequality and a public health crisis. The psychological and social consequences are profound, and the professional consequences can be career-ending. The link to health emergencies is also important. Health emergencies magnify violence against women and girls, including digital violence. They also increase women's exposure and vulnerabilities. During outbreaks, disasters, or conflicts, our operations depend heavily on digital surveillance and reporting systems, online coordination platforms, data collection tools, remote care through telemedicine, and digital communications with communities. This reliance creates several urgent risks. First, women responders become high visibility targets for online hate, doxing, which is the act of publicly revealing personal information, impersonation, and deepfake manipulations, which is, for instance, an image or recording that has been altered or manipulated to misrepresent. Women epidemiologists and surveillance officers, data analysts, and community leaders are increasingly singled out. These attacks cause psychological trauma, heighten mental and psychosocial support needs, and place enormous pressure on already stretched teams. Secondly, digital attacks underpin public trust. Harassment and misinformation targeting women, especially the experts there within this context, directly erodes confidence in health messaging and weakens risk communications and community engagement, which are essential for outbreak control. Thirdly, digital violence does not remain online. It follows women responders into the field. It affects their safety, their credibility with communities, and their ability to lead. Fourthly, gendered digital divides intensify harm. In many humanitarian settings, women have less access to safe devices, secure connectivity, and digital literacy. This creates barriers to life-saving information, exposes women to digital exploitation, and limits access to tools such as digital cash transfers. So, although digital violence may not immediately appear to be a health emergency issue, it is deeply connected to safety, to access, to trust, and to operational effectiveness. What can we do about it? To strengthen preparedness, digital safety must become a foundational part of emergency planning. First, we need to integrate digital protection into preparedness frameworks. This includes protocols to address online harassment and impersonation, safeguards for the digital identities of staff, cyber secure handling of data, and rapid response mechanisms to mitigate digital threats. Secondly, we must closely address the issues of gender divides that exist. Women must have access to safe devices, affordable connectivity, and digital literacy. Without this, women may be excluded from outbreak alerts, community messaging, and humanitarian services. Thirdly, as we expand digital and artificial intelligence systems in emergency operations, we must embed safeguards against biased algorithms, misuse of survivor data, discriminatory surveillance, and digital exploitation. Preparedness is not only technical, it is about protecting dignity, it is about protecting safety, and it is about protecting leadership. We in WHO and in the Health Emergencies Program have a call to action for the 16 days. During this campaign, the program is advancing several actions. One, disseminating evidence-based visuals on digital safety in health emergencies, which really ensure that we push the messaging of safer women, safer communities. Amplifying the voices of women responders and digital champions, working closely with partners including UNFPA, UN Women, and the Interagency Standing Committee Gender Reference Group to strengthen coordinated solutions. Our message is clear and simple. Digital safety is health safety, and every emergency response must uphold zero tolerance for violence, whether online or offline. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stella, for that robust and elucidating foundation. 101. Our next perspective is vital, focusing on the protection of vulnerable populations. And we now turn to the work of the UNFPA. Strategic partnerships are at the heart of our work in WHE Gender Working Group. And UNFPA remains one of WHO's strongest partners. We admire their pioneering leadership in sexual and reproductive health rights and the protection of women and girls in humanitarian contexts, especially against violence against women. When invited, the executive director responded promptly by immediately demonstrating UNFPA's commitment to walking the talk. Today, we have Dr. Eugene Kongui, who will present the UNFPA's perspective on this year's 16-year theme. Dr. Kongui is the Deputy Director of UNFPA's Humanitarian Response Division and a seasoned expert in crisis settings, sexual and reproductive health, and a protection of women and girls in emergencies. His extensive field leadership gives him a uniquely grounded perspective on today's topic. Please join me to welcome Dr. Eugene Kongui.
Thank you, Vera. Good day, everyone. Allow me to express our sincere gratitude for the invitation to UNFPA. As new technologies are emerging, whether it is AI, whether it is new social media, we are seeing new ways, new tactics that are being used to perpetrate violence against others. We are seeing a new wave of technology-facilitated gender-based violence, ranging from whether it is trolling, image-based abuse, doxing, and sophisticated forms of cyber stalking. You can name it. There are new names that are coming up that we never heard before. And the harm is not contained on the screen. The harm is on the lives of people on the streets. The adolescent girls are the most at risk. We now know that up to 58% of young women and adolescents have faced some form of online violence. But everyone is at risk. Although women and girls are the most affected, especially when they are in conflict-affected areas. Data is still limited because of underreporting and because it is a new area. But we know that the risks are correlated with low levels of digital literacy, absence of legal frameworks, economic deprivation, which are all linked to conflict or humanitarian settings. Our country offices, UNFPA country offices, reporting from different countries worldwide, whether it is in Syria, Palestine, Afghanistan, Nepal, DRC, all show that the levels of technology-facilitated gender-based violence are rising. We're seeing that the weaponization of online spaces leaking of images and videos of survivors, now called doxing. We see fear of honor-related violence, where perpetrators or survivors are afraid to go online because of honor violence, the use of violence to justify by the fact that we want to protect the image of the family or the community. In some checkpoints, we find that the phones are searched, data extracted, and later used to coerce or blackmail the survivor. We are also receiving information about coordinated hate campaigns and misinformation, targeting especially women leaders, journalists, and advocates. There are also, what we are seeing is also denial of technology, which is violent itself. In some countries, internet is shut down and people do not have access to online services, whether they are health, education, and their life. So the consequences are many. They go beyond health. In health, it is not just mental health. It leads to physical health too, as well as lack of access to health care. Because in many of these humanitarian settings, people sometimes can only access health through online services, as well as education, access to learning, academic performance, dropout from school, digital literacy due to the fact that people go offline because they are being targeted. There is economic participation, which is a problem because as you go online, you lose networking, remote working, you lost the job, and productivity, as well as financial exploitation that is linked to blackmail and the like. Political agency is another aspect of it because the voices are being silenced, hate campaign, which lead to self-censorship. In many humanitarian settings, because people cannot gather in physical community, the only way they can join community is online. But now they lose communities because they can't go online. These are human rights issues. They are the right to safety and dignity, the right to privacy, the right to freedom of expression, the right to equality and non-discrimination that are being seriously violated. For UNFPA, this is serious. So UNFPA is actively advancing global effort to understand first and then see how to address it. It's a new area. As our executive director said a few weeks ago, ending digital violence requires responsible technology design, strong systems of accountability, and an ecosystem of partners working in harmony and pulling in the same direction. So UNFPA is working to train and support our frontline responders in different countries, whether it is we are doing that already in Syria, Palestine, investing in dedicated technology-facilitated gender-based violence plans in which we embed some form of research to understand what is going on. We are working at the interagency level to ensure that this form of violence is taken into account. So in interagency coordination tools and plans. In Cameroon, for example, we just concluded a study, the first ever study on technology-facilitated gender-based violence. The findings are under review and will be released soon. In Ethiopia, we are collaborating with TikTok, Center for Information Resilience, and partners. An assessment has been conducted on online platforms, and TikTok convened a workshop of partners, and this is taken into account, digital violence is taken into account in the 2026 humanitarian response plan. So our plea is that let's leverage the humanitarian research, the ongoing reform, to better address these emerging risks. We cannot simply add technology to the existing programs and coordination and hope for the best. We must move from being reactive to proactive. Let's use survivor-centered digital safety and ensure that it's embedded in the very designs of our intervention. And protection of survivor data is key. Attackers are out there looking for data, and we can become, as the UN and partners working to prevent it, we can become the source of risk if we don't protect the data. The protection, we should ensure that the firewall for the data that we hold is as strong as the physical security walls. In conclusion, our approach is not to limit access to online services or online networking, but to ensure the protection and safeguard of dignity, right, and well-being, both online and offline, both in development and humanitarian setting. UNFPA is firmly committed to confronting this growing challenge and supporting communities to creating safer, more equitable digital spaces for all. Thank you very much.
That our protection is as... Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Eugene Conwy. Our protection needs to be as strong as social security walls, and we need to enhance the digital ecosystems, and we are learning so much. Remember, we said that UNFPA has done some really groundbreaking and pioneering work on digital violence against women. You could consult their website, and some resources will be posted online. Today, for our keynote address, we are particularly honored and privileged to welcome none other than the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, its causes and consequences. Appointed by the Human Rights Council in 2021, Ms. Al-Salem brings over 2 decades of experience across gender equality, humanitarian response, and the protection of displaced and vulnerable populations. She has served in 13 countries with UNHCR and has consulted widely with UN Women, UHCR, UNICEF, IOM, and leading academic and civil society institutions. Her expertise spans international human rights law, international humanitarian law, and the realities faced by women and girls in crisis settings, making her uniquely placed to deliver today's keynote address. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Ms. Rim Al-Salem, UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, its causes and consequences. Welcome, Ms. Rim.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this warm welcome. And thank you also to WHO for organizing this timely webinar and for inviting me. As you probably know, the issue of online violence or violence perpetrated through digital technologies is an issue that's very close to the heart of the mandate. My predecessor had produced one of the first and pioneering reports on online violence against women and girls in 2018. And together with other international and regional mechanisms that deal with discrimination and violence against women and girls, we also put out a policy paper. That platform that brings us together is called the EDWA platform. And in 2022, we actually produced a policy paper on this. And I'm asking also my colleague who supports my mandate, Vera, if she's hearing me, to also link the 2 reports for the attention of those that are following us. Now, I know I'm not saying anything new when I say that we all understand that interactions online and through digital technologies are very deeply gendered. And that shouldn't be surprising because, of course, those interactions mirror the inequality that exists in power, resources, and choices, including between men and women. We know, as was mentioned, that fewer women and girls than men and boys use the internet. And we also know that females generally experience more barriers than males in accessing the internet. And that is even more so the case in humanitarian and crisis settings. I want to also acknowledge that although we're going to focus obviously on the challenges and gaps in protecting women and girls against online violence and that perpetrated through digital technologies, that is not to say that digital technologies don't have a positive aspect to them. And I want to actually formally acknowledge that because from what we see, particularly in crisis settings, marginalized groups, excluded groups, and members belonging to them, including women and girls, have and continue to use online technologies where it is available to them to build solidarity networks, to participate in different conversations and processes that perhaps otherwise would not be available to them. They allow them to amplify their voices and the voices of their communities on their needs. They've allowed them to fundraise and to coordinate, not just between themselves on humanitarian response, but also between human rights defenders and mediators on a conflict. But of course, we're all aware of the darker side to this reality, and we are aware that because of this perception of anonymity, online spaces can become platforms for increased violence and threats of violence against women and girls, including harassment, sexual exploitation, deep fakes, grooming, stalking, and doxing. And I also include in the forms of online violence that exploit women and girls pornography. But I will come to that later. I know that many of you also know from your own experience that different groups of women are particularly exposed to such online violence on intersecting grounds. And from my experience, women and girls that are particularly visible in societies or have very strong voices, public voices, are also particularly at risk. So women in politics, women journalists, women human rights defenders, leaders of civil society networks, indigenous women and girls that are, for example, at the forefront of defending their territories and their communities against attacks. And what makes this very gendered is when the attackers use very sexualized language, language that is loaded with misogyny, and that also not only intends to attack women and girls professionally, but also tries to humiliate their bodies, their appearance, and their conduct. And that can be of grave consequences, especially in societies or places where there are limits to how women can behave and interact. And if she is seen as not conforming to what society dictates, that can have very grave consequences. But the objective is always the same. It's to intimidate women and girls, to silence them, and to actually also force them to withdraw from public life or give up the very vocal roles and public roles that they play. So since we're talking about crisis, I would say that violence perpetrated online becomes therefore another tool of also persecuting women and girls and attacking also the communities to which they belong. These communities could be particularly vulnerable to attacks because of race, religion, political opinion, ethnicity, or other reasons. Now, I would encourage all of us to really look beyond the individual harm that online violence causes, to recognize that it's really an attack also at the very heart of democracy, and it is an attack against society as a whole. Because if you try to undermine the equality and participation of half of society, then all of society suffers. And I want to say that we often hear that trying to put limitations to attacks or incitement online could go against freedom of thought or expression. But that is, of course, a false argument, because international human rights law is very clear, namely that humans don't have unlimited freedoms, but their freedoms are limited when they encroach on the freedoms of others, and in particular when their speech or thought constitutes incitement of violence or actual violence against others, including against women and girls based on being female. So, as was already said, unfortunately, despite these very well-known risks and gaps and challenges, the existing regulations continue to be very inadequate in protecting women and girls against such attacks. Yes, it's great that certain platforms and companies that facilitate these kind of platforms are trying to self-regulate, but I join others in saying that self-regulation on its own is not enough. We need enforceable and mandatory rules and regulations, and we need also a strong government and state oversight. And these have to really adapt to the fast changing nature of online violence and that perpetrated through digital technologies. So, whereas we were speaking in the past, of pornography, which in my view is a form of violence, online violence against women and girls. Now we have an explosion of deep fakes, videos. We have also AI generated pornographic material. Most of this, as we said, is created without the consent of the individuals that are depicted. We also know, in fact, that women in crisis situations, particularly those involved in politics and the defense of human rights, can also often be filmed, can often be tortured or sexually abused or degraded, and then subjected to threats to have this material leaked or published. And that, of course, again, is a tool of coercion and persecution against the individual concerned. I also want to highlight that one of the ways, of course, of dealing with this, as was said, is through education. Educating those that may become victims of violence about the rights where they can seek support. That, of course, requires their support to be available, whether it's psychological support, legal support, effective and prompt reporting mechanisms. The justice system has to be able to deal with these kind of crimes, which again is not a given in many countries. The legal systems in a number of countries are still lagging behind, but also, of course, the users, males included, on their duties with regards to conduct in such spaces. And I think we also underestimate the extent to which the fact that the governance of digital platforms is still very much male-dominated influences these kind of approaches. We need more women in governance boards and in shaping digital technology, because as long as women continue to also be excluded, their concerns and their needs will not be sufficiently addressed. We need the issue of digital and online violence to be treated really as the priority that it is, as a global emergency. And since it transcends borders and thrives on this cross-border nature of it, we need also urgently better collaboration and data sharing in order to track incidents of online violence and also in order to hold those accountable and to share also best practices between countries. I'm very often asked, in fact, by different government entities, law enforcement, about what other countries are doing in order to fight online violence. And so I think we need more structured and more numerous opportunities to do that. So I mean, a lot of more can be said, but I think I will stop here, and I'm sure we can elaborate further in the discussion and the Q&A. Thank you.
A big thank you to you, Ms. Special Rapporteur for Violence Against Women. We are really grateful for your investment and for your willingness to join at such short notice. When we invited her, she answered yes within 5 minutes of receiving the email. So thank you so much. And it is a wonderful thing that this session is recorded so that we can all go back and learn and relearn. And please put your questions in the Q&A box so that they can be answered shortly. The next topic is risk communication, community protection, and is resilience. From the risk communication, community protection, and resilience. And here to present it is an expert in this topic in health emergencies. Dr. Kai von Habel leads WHO's work on community protection and resilience, including risk communication, community engagement, and managing evolving information threats. His work sits at the intersection of public trust, communication, and emergency response. He will speak on risk communication, community protection, and resilience. Please join me to give a warm welcome to Dr. Kai von Habel.
Thank you very much, Vera, and also thanks to Dr. Stella, Dr. Eugene, and also Ms. Reem, the Special Rapporteur, for this really great framing of this discussion. And I fully agree that this is a very important event today, and it's great that it's been recorded, because I think what was already highlighted are very, very central points for many of us in our daily lives. And thanks also to give the opportunity to give a brief outline on what we are doing, what our activities and priorities in this space from the perspective of community protection. Next slide. And I think many of you are familiar, but for those that have not heard about community protection, this is one of the 5 core capabilities in WHO's Health Emergency Prevention, Preparedness, Response, and Resilience, or HEPA framework. And community protection is really about safeguarding the health and well-being and livelihoods of people at risk and affected by crisis. And of course, when we talk about well-being, this includes explicitly psychosocial well-being, and this is especially affected in the digital environment and what we are discussing today. And our approach to community protection is really based on lessons learned, in particular from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also many other recent health emergencies, which repeatedly show the similar challenges around low trust in institutions, in many settings, unequal access, both to information and to essential services, and low adherence to public health guidance, especially when messages do not resonate with local realities. And this is a WHO, UNICEF, IFRC shared approach that puts communities at the center of preparedness, response, and long-term resilience for health emergencies. And it is built around these 3 core objectives that you see here on the screen. The first is risk communication, community engagement, and infodemic management. That's the main topic that I will speak of today. It's ensuring that communities receive timely, accurate, and relevant information, and that there are feedback loops, mechanisms to address rumors in particular, which is very important in this context as well, and systems to detect and respond to misinformation and community concerns. Then second, We have population and environmental health interventions, ensuring that these are implemented and that they are context-specific, feasible, and socially acceptable. And this means really seeing communities not as passive recipient of aid and also of information, but as active agents who co-create and co-lead solutions. Again, a very relevant topic here in this context as well. And third, the third objective of our community protection framework is about recognizing and addressing social, economic, and vulnerability factors that define whether communities are actually able to take protective action themselves. And that includes factors such as income security, access to care, and also gender inequalities. And digital violence really plays a role across all these three objectives. And in my short intervention, the next few slides, I will focus on how this affects community protection and what WHO is doing to support countries in addressing this growing problem. Next slide. First, as our director has very strongly outlined already, digital violence is a gender and a public health imperative because it disproportionately affects women. Evidence shows that women experience much higher levels of online harassment, often 3 to 4 times higher than their male counterparts. And this really reduces their ability to participate safely in community decision-making, digital consultations, and public health communications. Second, digital violence has become a driver of misinformation, which is a very important aspect for us in WHO around community protection and declining trust. And RCCE, our approach to risk communication, community engagement, really depends on trusted messengers. That includes community health workers, nurses, journalists, civil society leaders, and the majority of those are women. When these women are harassed, threatened, and driven offline, then harmful rumors fill that space. And this contributes to this harmful cycle that we show here on the right. Digital violence leads to silence and withdrawal of communicators. That leads to loss of trusted communicators. And again, misinformation proliferates, which intensifies digital violence. We saw this as an example in polio responses where local leaders who encourage vaccination have faced harassment through coordinated online attacks. And this distorts community dialogue and silences the most trusted local voices. Third, digital violence is also a mental health and psychosocial issue, and Dr. Eugene highlighted this aspect. It affects the well-being of community members. It contributes to anxiety and fear and undermines safe participation in digital public spaces, which are really essential during health emergencies. So MHPSS is a very important component of our community response to any emergency, and that includes digital violence. And fourth, digital violence also undermines responders and emergency operations. And Ms. Reem highlighted this already, the growing number of women responders that reduce their public visibility or avoid online communication after they are experiencing harassment. This directly affects emergency responses, weakens our RCCE campaigns, and reduces real-time communication capacity, and ultimately erodes trust between responders and communities. And we saw this ourselves during COVID-19, when many public health leaders, including WHO staff, but also MOH and National Public Health Institute leaders, and many others were targeted online very aggressively. And often this unfortunately led to a reduced social media presence of some of these most trusted and credible voices. So this is important that we recognize this and address that issue. Next slide. And through the community protection framework, we support countries to ensure that both communities and responders can engage in decision-making, both online and offline. We are supporting countries in developing or strengthening pathways for safe participation in community engagement processes that, again, online and offline, and particularly this includes women, youth, and any vulnerable group in the country. And we are also integrating gender-aware social listening into our RCCE and infodemic management systems to detect harassment patterns early and protect frontline communicators that are so much at risk. And we support countries to protect those community leaders by ensuring that digital safety is integrated into our RCCE, MHPSS, and social protection plans. And our planning support packages are usually include a specific session on this particular topic. And we see, as you can see here, an example of a deep fake that was already mentioned many times already, affecting one of our most prominent colleagues. And it's really important to counter such attacks visibly, as was done here. Next slide. And after my short intervention here, we will hear some very relevant examples in the interventions in the field. But just to highlight some entry points, many of them were mentioned already today by the other speakers, but specifically for community protection and RCCE, some entry points for countries and partners to address this issue as part of community protection. First, countries can integrate digital safety considerations into all RCCE and infodemic management activities, including assessments, planning, etc., and develop and disseminate safe online engagement protocols for all public-facing experts. And here you can see a very good example of guidance shown, best practices for news organizations, for practical measures that can be adapted for emergency settings. Second, we encourage proactive countermeasures against targeted harassment and impersonation. And this includes monitoring for early signs of coordinated attacks, for example, through the social listening mechanisms that we are supporting countries in establishing that can be used to detect harassment-linked misinformation trends at a larger scale early and then allow for early intervention. And third, we recommend countries to consider including digital violence into community vulnerability assessments and community protection planning, because it's a significant part of the risk environment that shapes whether communities can access information, participate safely, and take proactive action. This is an intersectoral issue, and that's why it's great to see the intersectoral participation also in this webinar that really requires very strong coordination between actors that are engaged. Next slide. And just to close, and echoing our director's words in the beginning, we see digital violence as a serious threat to public health and community resilience, and we are committed to advance this agenda as part of community resilience and expand our partnership with UNFPA, UNICEF, IFRC, UN Women, and digital platforms that were also mentioned, and of course, with a special rapporteur. Thank you very much, and back to Vera.
Thank you so much, Kai, for this impressive and eye-opening session on what it is, on the ground and technically to us. We hope that you can help us sensitize more during these 16 days so that we may all really learn about this important cross-cutting topic. Now we are getting closer and closer to eyewitness evidence. But before we get to evidence from the field and from survivors, our next topic is community and youth perspective on digital harm. Ms. Suhala Shamseldin is a youth and development specialist. Well, no, sorry, it's Dr. Millie Phiri. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Millie Phiri is an independent journalist and author whose work illuminates the lived realities behind emerging forms of violence. Her voice helps us to understand the human impact far beyond the terminology. Please give a warm welcome to Ms. Phiri, who will present on surviving digital violence.
Thank you very much to the previous speakers before me, and thank you so much to WHO for convening this dialogue. I'm a research associate with Walter Sisulu University in South Africa, and I'm also a journalist and author. And the insights that I'm going to be sharing with you may come from my book, which I wrote called Gender-Based Violence and Digital Media in South Africa. And South Africa being very interesting in that it is one of those few countries that have actually ratified all the international conventions and regional conventions around gender-based violence, except one which it has signed, but it is not ratified, and it pertains to women politicians. And also, South Africa is very interesting in that it has got about 10 laws around gender-based violence, and also in a constitution that aligns with those laws as well. And 3 of them were actually introduced recently, and I'll talk about that later. And so I'll start by trying to contextualize the situation. Why digital violence is a public health issue is we have already had, it's very targeted. Like my experience in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, showed that it is very targeted at women journalists, at female politicians, and at female human rights defenders, as well as the LGBTQ communities. They face the common forms of that violence is actually cyberbullying, doxing, and sexual harassment, and digital stalking. So the fear of being watched online places is actually a very chilling effect on women. And digital surveillance and violence often take a sexualized form of, or it includes like sexist or misogynistic remarks, as we've had, and the violence often escalates when they belong to the groups that I've just alluded to. So, for example, one journalist had her phone number doxed on X and resulted in violent threats and harassment, and another journalist had her was threatened on X that she would receive a bullet in her head. So the public health impact is very clear. Digital harassment erodes mental health and silences critical voices, as we have heard, but also it weakens emergency communication systems. Next slide. So it's this kind of violence is an epidemic, and it's mostly sometimes fueled by manospheres around the world. And one of the examples of these, male-driven online platforms, Reddit's Red Pill, and in South Africa it can be likened to a hashtag called Men Are Not Trash. And in these platforms, you see that there is a hostility that is there, that blames feminism and that normalizes violence and influences policy debates, creating risks for women, for women's health and safety. And surveillance of women actually leads to what we've already had: withdrawal from online sources, from online spaces. For example, one journalist that I spoke to in the field had to flee the country after persistent online threats escalated to offline spaces and had a car tires slashed. And another survivor said, even the perception of stalking online induced fear in her, and she had to withdraw from public life. So these examples just show how digital trauma compounds stress, silences critical voices, and undermines psychosocial health. Next slide, I'll now turn to the survivor-centered interventions. So you find that interventions that normally work are really grounded in survivor realities. In South Africa, we have seen trauma-informed helplines integrated with privacy safeguards. Survivors can actually call without fearing of exposure, because they'll be dealing with staff that are trained to respond sensitively, and discrete referral pathways are used to connect victims to health and legal services. So some female journalists have said at first they didn't know where to go and report when they were harassed online. So they called for, they've emphasized the importance of mental health support, cybersecurity trainings, and solidarity networks within media houses. And so these interventions really help to restore trust and provide psychosocial care and strengthen resilience against digital harassment. Next slide. So one of the interventions, obviously, is that there's a need for robust legal reforms, because most survivors often drop cases because they have no trust in the police and the courts. And therefore, there's a need to have stronger protective measures. And this involves having legal reforms, strict penalties, and I think something that was already shared here, that you need platform accountability. And this really depends on platform owners, such as cooperation of platform owners such as Facebook and so forth. So, and also the other thing that hampers lawmaking around violence is that governments themselves, some governments, as I found out in the field, they are taking part in targeted surveillance against female politicians, or against female journalists or female human rights defenders. So they are increasing instances where the governments themselves are utilizing trolls to subvert discussions that don't align with their objectives. So, and I've also noticed that there is a research and data gap where, the extent of gender trolling, gender-based trolling is yet to be known. And so there's need for research on current data protection laws to assess if these holistically deal with women and digital violence. And the last point, slide 6, the next slide, deals with the feminist activism itself, which to me is very, very crucial. And it also shows how sometimes the online space is positive. I've noticed that digital platform spaces like the hashtag total shutdown, hashtag #AmINext, that can be likened to the Me Too campaigns or Black Lives Matter, are very crucial in that they help women to really articulate opinions and experiences that would otherwise remain silenced. For example, there's Scandal Facebook page and those online platforms that I researched. Survivors debated, this kind of violence. Total Shutdown, the hashtag Total Shutdown movement, presented about 24 demands to the South African government, and it led to the formulation of the strategic policy that started in 2020, and it will run until 2030. It also culminated in South Africa actually introducing 3 new pieces of legislation after public pressure that included these movements and through their online digital platforms. So these platforms offer collaboration, and opportunities and new ideas. For example, I remember during the debates around, on the MINExt platform, a Society for Obstetricians and Gynecologists said they were going to review their rules on how to identify signs of abuse and offer support and treatment. This was as a result of the conversations that were coming on these platforms. Just to wind up, so these digital platforms actually challenge norms. For example, instead of just focusing on how many women have been digitally stalked, we can also focus on how many men have stalked women, so that the blame is on the perpetrators, not the victims. So these platforms actually provide women with anonymity to avoid retaliation and to express controversial views. So representation itself is a form of intervention. So debates on Facebook really help to normalize survivor voices and challenge patriarchal narratives. So yeah, I've had conversations like don't leave boys behind and men behind, and there've been requests for a sex offenders list in South Africa, and it was through the hashtag total shutdown as well. Although this list is now available, it has not been made public as yet. So there's still pressures around that. So just to round up the last slide, call to action. I think digital violence is some kind of public health emergency, and we must elevate survivor voices in global frameworks. And safety is not a privilege; it is a right. And together we can build systems that protect, empower, and restore trust. I'm going to end here for now, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Millie, for this shift from the macro level to a deeply personal reality of the issue we are talking about. It is now essential that we ground this conversation with experiences from the ground, from the field. We need to hear from eyewitnesses, or from what we call the horse's own mouth. Here to present community and youth perspective on digital harm is Ms. Sohaila Seldin. She's a youth and development specialist working on the front line of community engagement. She brings essential insights into how young people experience and navigate new risks in digital and crisis environments. So she will share the youth perspective with us. Welcome, Sohaila.
Welcome. Thank you. Yeah, you can hear me well, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm very sorry for not having enough time to prepare a presentation, but I'm preparing everything that I want to say from the field. So let's start. As you mentioned, my name is Sohaila Shamsuddin, and I'm honored to be here today representing EPI-WIN, a national NGO based in Egypt that has been working in youth development and humanitarian response since 2006. In my work in proposal writing, research, and communication at EPI-WIN, paired with my role on the WHO EMRO Youth Steering Committee, I spend a great deal of time listening to and documenting the experiences of the displaced and refugee communities we serve. Today, I would like to bring their perspectives into this room, especially on the issue that is growing rapidly across our region, digital violence. Although my work is not on the front line, I read every report, interview transcript, and case summary that our teams collect. And what is striking is how often digital violence appears not as a side issue, but as a central part of the harm refugees face. Young people tell our teams that three major repeatedly things. The first one is that the threats don't stop because we moved, they follow us on our phones. The fear is always there, you don't know who is watching. If someone leaks something online, my whole life can collapse. So, digital violence for displaced people is a continuation of vulnerability in a new form. It crosses borders effortlessly and it leaves survivors with constant anxiety that they are being monitored or targeted. Through Ittijah humanitarian program, including Sanat safe spaces in Giza and Dumyata, where most of the refugees in Egypt are allocated, it is clear that digital violence is rapidly intertwined with traditional forms of gender-based violence. So, caseworkers frequently report that online blackmail leads to physical threats, harassment that forces girls to stop attending schools or trainings, and surveillance by former partners, relatives, or traffickers. These patterns appear constantly across the data and case logs I review, and even though the violence happens digitally, the consequences are entirely real: isolation, withdrawal, depression, and silence. So let me share with you on the field level what Ittijah do in Egypt. So we approach digital violence not from speculation, but from documented practice. Our safe spaces that is mainly for gender-based violence from women, 90% are mainly refugees and 10% are from host communities. We provide confidential, survivor-centered GBV case management, and it increasingly includes digital safety awareness in the recent years, support around online blackmail, and counseling for survivors facing online threats. Our data shows thousands of refugees access our humanitarian services annually, reflecting a deep community reliance on these mechanisms. So we integrate digital safety messages into every major program that reaches displaced people. In 2024, our youth and women empowerment program engaged more than 63,000 individuals, including refugees, children, youth, and caregivers, through population awareness clubs, which is the PAX program around all the Egyptian governorates, edutainment theater, and the music teams when we spread awareness through community theater, community dialogues, and awareness campaigns in 16 governorates. Digital threats are discussed openly, helping reduce stigma and encouraging help seeking through partnership like the ILO Digitalize Your Business program, which include 175 beneficiaries, 66% of them were refugees. We saw how digital empowerment naturally builds digital protection. When young refugees understand digital tools, they also understand digital risks. So it should all start, and we do this, that we start investing in trained humanitarian staff. So Ittijah humanitarian team receive ongoing training in GBV case management and safe referrals, digital violence identification, cash-based protection for GBV survivors, and psychosocial support. From every report I read, 3 messages come through clearly. We want to feel safe online, not supervised, not controlled, but safe. We need pathways to report digital harm without fear, as many don't understand that their cases will be taken seriously. We want digital inclusion, not digital withdrawal, as young refugees want to learn, work, and participate online without risking their dignity or safety. From the perspective of someone who writes reviews and evaluates programs every day, I believe 3 things are essential. First, integrating digital violence into all GBV and protection frameworks, as it can no longer be treated as an emerging issue. It is a current and pressing one. Second, strengthening regional collaboration, as digital crimes affecting refugees often involve perpetrators across borders. Our responses should match their reality. Third, expanding community-led and youth-led digital safety initiatives, as youth are not beneficiaries, they are implementers, trainers, and leaders, and they can be leaders of their communities too. So we need to trust them to design solutions that speak their own languages, not mine. Behind every number is a person navigating displacement and trying to stay safe in both physical and digital spaces. Digital violence may take new forms, but the essential need to remain unchanged: safety, dignity, and the ability to move forward without fear. By keeping refugees' voices at the center, we create responses that genuinely protect both their present and their future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, I will say I'm so glad that this is recorded, because I need to go back to it and really learn. Now we are getting to a very crucial moment of the webinar, and there are questions, so many questions. We'll be able to get a few. Let me see. The first question is for the special rapporteur. Of course, he has a pride of place. Actually, there are many questions, but let me get the main one. Just 1 minute, I'm pulling it up. Teams is acting up. Yeah, my Teams is acting up. It's down. We have it here. Just 1 minute. Okay, for the UN Special Rapporteur, what is your perspective on the relationship between artificial intelligence and digital violence, particularly against women? If statistics indicate a positive correlation between the rise of AI and increasing rates of digital violence, why have legal frameworks been so slow to respond? Is this due to the lack of clear judicial definition of digital violence, or the difficulty of identifying and tracing perpetrators?
Yes, thank you for this important question. I actually typed in my response, and the issue of violence through digital technologies and AI was actually the subject also, or some of what I addressed in my last report to the Human Rights Council in June this year. I dedicated it to sex-based violence, emerging issues. And if you look under that section, I was able to really demonstrate through the data that is available that violence through digital technologies, AI-generated violence, is very much gendered and targets very much women and girls in very profound and disturbing ways. So, for example, in 2021, a study on online violence against women in 45 countries worldwide found that 85% of the women surveyed had encountered online violence, including the sharing of intimate and sexual content through social media, sextortion, and cyberbullying. And according to another report, 97% of the child sexual abuse imagery seen in reports showed girls. And new tools such as generative artificial intelligence for the creation of manipulated videos, images, or audio are being used for malicious purposes. So there's actually a lot of information that shows that, including, the fact that manipulated images of sexual abuse, which are known as deep fakes, really target women. So I think we have the data. We know that this is the case. With regards to why it's not being done, I'm going to give you my views on this. It's because there's a lot of profit that is made from allowing these platforms to continue in the unrestrained manner that they are doing. And so economically, it's too viable to do so. And I also refer to the fact that even international tools, such as the recently adopted United Nations Convention Against Cybercrime, it still unfortunately allows state parties to exclude under their domestic law the production, transmission, or possession of things such as child sexual abuse material involving an adult, as well as any material that is generated by artificial intelligence or that does not depict a real child. So if it doesn't depict a real child, it's allowed to be used and to be produced. But this, I think, is very concerning if it's not classified as a criminal offense. So there are still, unfortunately, impediments and refusal to deal with these crimes in the appropriate way. Over to you.
Thank you very much. The next two questions are for the two gentlemen on the panel of WHO and UNFPA. Currently, is there any structural policy already in place to combat digital violence? And what area of improvement do WHO and UNFPA think that this field needs in order to be improved? I'll read the questions out again. Currently, is there any structural policy already in place to combat digital violence? And what area of improvement do WHO and UNFPA think this field needs to improve? We will start with Kai.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very important, or two very important questions. And I look forward also to the comments from Dr. Eugene from UNFPA. When it comes to the guidance available, I would say that this is an evolving field, especially when it comes to more low resource and crisis settings. Across the UN system, we have a lot of guidance around GBV, minimum standards, digital safety guidance, and also community-based protection guidance, including our community protection framework and the many tools that we are having about survivor-centered support, etc. So, but also the truth is that there's no single comprehensive global guidelines available on this important topic. And that's a gap that we see here from WHO, and I think it will be important to collaborate on that moving forward. When it comes to the areas for further strengthening from WHO perspective, I would like to highlight three key areas that we work on also when it comes to the broader community protection approach. Number one, we have to build the evidence on this. There's a lot of evidence that was mentioned today already, but I think there are a lot of gaps as well on what is the impact on digital violence, what is that, how does that affect women's participation, etc., in particular in specific LMIC contexts, etc. So in general, we as WHO, of course, we see ourselves as a technical and normative setting agency that supports evidence-informed approaches, and that's really important here as well. The second one is on the digital monitoring approaches, and that's where we made a lot of progress around the infodemic management approach that we have on social listening, etc. So we have to collect more systematically data to have really a comprehensive picture and gather insights from this data. And what is important is that this is done, of course, in a very ethical manner and in a people-centered approach for digital monitoring. And the third one is that these insights that we gather from the first two, we can translate into concrete action on the ground. And that's something that we really focus on as a community protection unit and as WHO as a whole. So we don't want to gather evidence for the sake of evidence. We're not an academic institution. We have to see that it has real world impact, that it leads to concrete recommendations, plans, procedures, etc., at the country and then down to the community level. These are the three most important areas that we have to progress. And then just to say, we also, I think, acknowledge very much from WHO side that this is not a top-down approach, that it's very difficult, or that guidance should not be only imposed from the Geneva level down to the field, but that's a bottom-up approach, very participatory, also engaging communities in the development and in the solution of these issues. So that's a very important approach that we take for any kind of guidance that we're developing. Back to you, Vera.
Thank you very much, Kai. And it's going to be a very obvious question for Dr. Conwy because, as I said, UNFPA has a lot of groundbreaking work in this area. Dr. Conwy.
Yeah, thank you, Vera. Not that obvious as this is a new area. In terms of policy, I think, yeah, the policy is evolving. From the UNFPA perspective, in terms of gender-based violence, we started in 2024 to integrate technology-facilitated gender-based violence in the global guidance that are used at country level. But it is still an evolving area, so we can't say we have done much. We are still learning. So it is changing and we will keep improving as we gather more evidence. So that said, the global policy is like guidelines that we develop at the UN, but we need the policy at country level. We need legal framework that really work. And many countries, the policies do not yet include these areas. The policies are old and they have not taken into consideration. They are far behind. The pace with which these violence is evolving is far outpace the way with which our policies are also changing. Now, in terms of what needs to be done, a lot of work. We already said we don't have enough evidence in this area. We know it will be difficult, but everything that we do, we must ensure that there is inbuilt research into it so that we gather enough data in the area. We also need training for the frontline responders because this is a new area. We can't expect people just to be handling things if they don't have their training, didn't consider that. Collaboration is very, very important. We mentioned that this is an area that involves the private sector, technology companies. We can't just work ourselves and say, well, technology companies, you are there, your platform, we are going to resolve the problem. We have to work with them. That's why I mentioned Ethiopia. We are working with TikTok and trying to see what we can do, but we need to involve those who have the platform. They have to work with us and work with partners, civil society, the UN agencies, or the government. We put together all parties to work together in the way we respond. I think those are the three things I wanted to say. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Conwy. And the next question is for Sohaila. From the data sharing and collaboration among countries, which age group is most vulnerable related to this digital violence, digital gender-based violence? Okay. Okay, so Sohaila is not there. Perhaps Ms. Fury could answer for us. Oh, okay. It looks like we lost them.
There was a question for me though from Malawi. Maybe I can come back to that, but let me just respond. I think he was asking whether the sharing of videos is a crisis, and I would say I think it is a crisis because it spreads harm and it increases trauma, and I think that the best, places to deal with that is looking at your constitution in Malawi and looking at the existing laws and where the gaps are, and also working with platform owners of where those videos would have shared, so that you can start on the process of taking those videos down. But it is definitely a crisis.
Millie.
What was the other question? Sorry.
Which age group is affected by digital violence from your research?
In my research, no, I was actually targeting Black women in townships, and that the age groups varied from 18 to the oldest you can think of. But what I noticed that online, when people were debating on online, there was a lot of misogynistic attacks on the women who were contributing on those platforms, which means that it is something that is very rife, and it is something that can affect any woman. For example, I just give an example of one woman who made a comment, I think, on marriage, and she had disguised herself as a man, and the other guy said, "Oh, that's the man," and she then responded and said, "I'm not a man, I'm actually a woman." And then the response was, "Oh, it is even worse, coming from a woman." So anyone really is targeted out there. As long as you are online, you are targeted. But I suppose there's need, for more research to actually see which age groups are targeted. But in my own research, it was, everybody from, who had access to those online digital platforms.
Okay, thank you so much. As we know, every good thing must come to an end. And in fact, every smart project must be time-bound. And so to offer final thoughts and formally close our webinar, we again invite Dr. Stella Chungo back to the floor.
Thank you so much, moderators. Thank you so much, all the distinguished panelists. It was an amazing session where we learned so much. We learned and heard from you that digital violence is accelerating. We've heard about various forms of it, whether it's through intimidation, silencing of voices, moving from online to offline abuse. One speaker even said, "This is striking at the heart of democracy." That is what we are facing today. Digital violence harms women and girls. It weakens emergency operations. It erodes community trust. And as the Secretary General reminds us, it is becoming one of the most severe and rapidly escalating forms of gender-based violence. We have heard about the issues, but also some solutions have been put forward. Public health solutions, institutional solutions, policy change, legislative solutions. We heard from our Egyptian colleague, digital tools that empower, trainings, regional collaborations. The list is long. Digital spaces have become an urgent front in our work. So as we begin the 16 days of activism, let us commit to building digital systems that uphold dignity, digital systems that advance equality, and that ensure that every woman and girl can participate, can live, and can thrive safely. I thank you.
Thank you all. Over to you, Supriya.
All the speakers today for this very enlightening webinar. As you can see from the comments, we've been, apologies for this, there's been a huge interest, lots of very interesting comments. So I'd like to thank first of all, Dr. Stella for being the inspiration behind this, Vera for organizing this whole issue, our very eminent speakers, Ms. Reem Al-Salam, Dr. Eugene Kongyu, and also Dr. Kai Harbu, Dr. Milifiri, and Suhaila. Thank you very much for speaking. I'd also like to thank everyone who's been working in the background, colleagues here, Antoine and Michael, who are in this room. They've been, pushing this thing up. Lynn, who's not in this room, but also played a great role. Maurizio and Romina, both in working in the background, our collaborating centered colleague, Kalika Sachdeva. And last but not least, I'd like to thank all the participants. Thank you very much for joining, for your interest. I know you've come from many different countries all over the world. We really appreciate your interest, and we hope to take this movement together forward. I hope you'll also join us at the EPI-WIN webinar this Wednesday. So this week we have, it's a special week. We have 2 EPI-WIN webinars this Wednesday at the usual time of 1 o'clock Geneva. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.